Hello everyone and welcome to episode 5 of Pulumi for IT Pros. This week we're going to have a look at resource options. So resource options are a way that we can customize some of the resources we are deploying, not around their properties or their settings in Azure, but some of the actual Pulumi configuration. And it'll make more sense when we dive into it. Now, the reason I am looking at this week is primarily down to a comment I had on the episode 3 video. So this was a comment from Tech at Scale who asked about the date created field that we added to the tag. So if you remember that, we used Python code to get the current date and format that and put it onto a tag so we knew when the resource was created. And he asked, how are you handling the fact that the next day running the Pulumi up and it will complain about the diff because the date has changed? And he is very correct, and we hadn't really thought about that at the time, but let's see what I mean by that, and then we'll have a look at how we can fix it using resource options. So if we go have a look at the command line, and we've got our environment set up the same way as we had at the end of episode 3, and if we go ahead and run Pulumi preview, what we will see is that it's looking to do some changes. Even though we haven't changed any of the code, it's looking to do some changes, some updates. And you can see that the difference is the tags. So if we run Pulumi preview and we add the diff flag, that will show us some more detailed information about what's going on. And we can see why it's looking to change the tags. And you can see there, it's looking to change the date created tag on all of these from the 28th of January to the 5th of February, which is today. So it's run the code and it runs that code every time and it's regenerating the date and oh, we need to change that. Obviously, we don't want to change that. The date created should be static. And so we need to do something about that. And this is where resource options can help us. They can do a few other things as well. But let's have a look at how to do the deal with the date change first, and then we'll have a look at them in some more detail. So let's go over to VS Code. Okay, here we are. And we'll start with the resource group. So what we need to do is we need to tell it, ignore the changes on that date created tag. So run it the first time that we do the deployment, but every subsequent time, if it's changed, ignore it. Don't pay attention to it, don't change it. And we can do this with resource options. So resource options are just a property of every Pulumi object that we create. And so it's called opts is the value in Python. In C#, it's a separate parameter into the function. You'll see how it is in each language, and I'll point you at the docs in a minute so you can go have a look at the examples in your language. But it's in the Pulumi package, and it's called resource options. Create one of those. And you can see here we've got lots of different options. What we want to look at is ignore changes. So ignore changes, as I said, it ignores any changes on a particular part of the resource. We need to tell it now what we want it to ignore. And so this is an array or a list, and then we need to give it the actual property. So we could do this. That would work, that would solve our problem. That would ignore any changes to the tags in our resource group here. That would work, but obviously it would ignore any changes to the tags. So if we actually did want to update our tags later, that would be a problem because it wouldn't pick that up. So what you can do instead is use a dot notation to get the specific tag. So we know our tag is called date created because it's here. So if we do that, and that's all we need. So that will ignore the changes on that specific tag. So if we go back to the command line, and let's just clear this out. And we'll do Pulumi preview, get rid of the diff again to make it a bit simpler to see. And we should see that the resource group has dropped off the list of things that need to be changed. The others will still have it because we didn't update those, but you can see it's only looking at the storage accounts. It's not looking at any of the resource group. So let's go back to VS Code and let's just go and copy and paste this change into the other resources that also have that, which is primarily the storage accounts. Let's just format that to lay it out a bit easier. Okay. So that's done that. If we go back to the command line and run that again, we should see this time that there are no changes required because we're ignoring that specific tag. There we go. And so you can do that for any property that you have in a resource. It's not uncommon to find certain resources that things change when you run it a second time. Not because you've changed anything, but because the cloud provider returns a slightly different value than what you put into it. It doesn't actually materially impact the resource, but it causes Pulumi to think that it needs to change that resource when it really doesn't. And so you can use this to do that. There are a whole load of resource options that you can set on a resource. And so the docs here, and I'll put the link to this in the show notes, but here are some of the resources that are quite useful. So I'm not going to run through them all, but some of the really useful ones. So additional secret outputs is a pretty useful one. Let's just zoom in a bit so you can see that better. Yeah, additional secret outputs. So Pulumi will generally pick up most secrets that are created from a resource and encrypt them in the state file. But if it doesn't, and you need to tell it that actually this property is a secret and it should be encrypted in the state file, You can use additional secret outputs to tell it those properties that need to do that. You can have custom timeouts. So if you know a resource takes longer than the default timeout to be created, you can amend that. Delete before replace. This is that thing I talked about before, where Pulumi will often try and recreate a resource before it deletes it to create a new copy. That relies on the random naming, but you can force it not to do that with the delete before replace. We can do a depends on, and I'll show you an example of using that as well. So often doing dependencies is done for you. So if you've got a resource and it's using the name of another resource to find out where the resource group is or something like that, then you don't need to do the dependency. But occasionally you're not doing that and there is no implicit dependency between a resource, you can define that in here with a depends on property. Ignore changes, we talked about that. Import, we're going to do a whole video on how to import existing resources into Pulumi, so we'll ignore that for now, but that field is used for that. You can use parent to establish a parent and child relationship between resources. I don't often do this in normal resources, but when we look at writing modules or component resources, this is quite useful. Provider is a really useful one, and we'll probably have a video on that as well. But this allows you to create an instance of the actual provider that Pulumi uses. So in our case, we're using the Azure provider. We don't create that at the moment. It's implied by using the environment variables, or actually in our case, the Azure CLI settings of how it's going to talk to Azure. But if you need to explicitly define how your deployment talks to Azure, or, and this is probably the use case we'll look at, you need multiple different providers, you need to be able to connect to different subscriptions or things like that, you can explicitly pass a provider to use for the resource. So retain on delete is kind of interesting. It basically tells Pulumi that if you run a destroy, actually don't destroy a resource, and that can be quite useful. One other one I just wanted to mention also was protect. So this is a really useful one if you want to protect some resources from accidental deletion, or probably more importantly, accidental recreation. So I use this one quite a lot with things like Kubernetes with AKS, where I mark the node pools as protected. This avoids somebody accidentally coming along, running a redeploy and changing something that meant the node pool would have to be recreated, and accidentally doing this, which would obviously delete all the nodes and recreate them. All my workloads would stop running. Not a great thing. It's not impossible that you can change something that requires a recreation, and so by doing this you can add a protection against that to say actually fail it if it wants to recreate a resource, because at the very least I want to check that's actually valid and I do want to do that. So you can add the protection, and you can always remove it later, but it's a useful thing to do. So let's have a quick look at how you can use those. So back in VS Code, and we're going to have a look at the resource group, and what we're going to do is we're going to add the protect property. And we'll set that to true. It's just a Boolean. So that will prevent us from deleting the resource group. On the storage account, come down here, we're also going to add a depends on. And the depends on is a list or an array of resources to depend on. So in this case, we're going to make a dependency on the resource group. That's the actual resource, not a string or anything. That's the actual resource. Now, we don't actually need that dependency. The dependency is already there because you've got this resource group name equals rg.name, so it's already implicitly applied there. Just wanted to call that out as how you do that. And then let's go down here on this storage account. We're going to add a protection on this storage account as well, so we can't accidentally delete or recreate that. Okay, so if we go back to the command line, and first up we're going to run Pulumi up, and it's important to recognize this. Those changes we made were only made in the file itself. The actual state file and the stack hadn't been changed. So if I had gone in immediately here and run Pulumi destroy, it would have allowed me to delete it. The protection wouldn't have applied. We need to run up once to get those protect values changed. And you can see here the difference it's going to apply is in the protect value. So let's go ahead and do that. And that will just add that into the state file so that they are protected. If we now run Pulumi destroy, what we will see is very quickly it comes back with an error telling us we can't delete that resource because it's protected, and to be able to delete it we need to unprotect it. The easiest way to unprotect it is to go back into your code and remove the protection flag. So if we go back to VS Code, we'll remove the protection flag from this storage account and go back to the command line, and we have to run Pulumi up first because we need to add that change in, and you should see that the change is only being applied to the storage accounts. Let's see what happens there. Yep, so that's just being added to those storage accounts. And then if we run Pulumi destroy again, it's still going to error because we've still got that on the resource group. but the only thing it's failing for is the resource group now and not those storage accounts. Okay, so that's how you can use resource options. A little bit shorter this week, but I wanted to get that one out to answer the question that got raised and just to make you aware of how you can set these different options. As I mentioned, there's a few of them in that list. We're going to dive into more detail. So things like providers and import, we'll look at those in another video, but hopefully that gives you a good idea of what the resource options allow you to do. And you can have a look at the docs if you want to go into more details of some of them, but we'll go into more detail of others later. But until then, I will see you hopefully next week and have a great rest of your day.